It's such an honor to have you on the pod. Andy and I are huge fans of your work.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
And Kristen, we hope that you were briefed ahead of time that this conversation is primarily going to be about the 2004 film Spartan, which is actually a big film for my friendship with Chris. We were
not a joke.
Weirdly big fans of this movie. And when Veronica Mars started, I think the same year, I think Chris and I said, wait, she was in Spartan.
We seriously did.
You guys have got your finger on the Kristen Bell pulse. I did know this was going to be all about Spartan because not many films choose to do a sort of press tour, 17 or so years after they come out. But some films do, and this is one of those films. Spartan is one of those films.
David Mamet has never worked in a traditional way.
No, he's always been against the grain. And you know what? Here's an easy visual way you can tell that it was the same year is that in the movie Spartan, I played the daughter of the president who was kidnapped and she was taken overseas and sort of tortured, and they cut her hair all off. And David said, I really want to cut your hair. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm an actor. I'll do anything for the role. And then we cut like a sort of jagged bob. And I was like, I can deal with this. And David said, no, that looks way too good. And let me tell you something, it did not look way too good. So the hairstylist really, really made it mangy, like a child who's taken scissors to their hair. And the recovery from the role, the like really traumatic role was a lot quicker than the recovery from that haircut.
Oh my God.
That haircut bled into Veronica Mars. So if you watch the pilot of Veronica Mars, you might be like, that was an experimental look. There's like wispies everywhere. It's not very even. And that was David's fault.
This is so great. The shadow of that movie, it's even longer than we could have dreamed. I'm so happy.
I also can't get David Mamet's hair salon out of my head as like, why hasn't he written a play set in a hair salon yet?
I mean, he could do anything. I have no doubt he'd find the intense undercurrent of malicious drama happening in a hair salon.
You want to cut to here? I want to cut to there. You want to cut to here? I mean, we could get really Meisner with it.
Oh my God. Yeah. Cut to here, cut to here, cut to here.
You have Joe Mantegna.
I'm done. That's all my questions.
We could get Mantegna in there. We could get, like Rebecca Pidgeon could definitely be like circling the salon somewhere.
Macy, everybody. We got to get all the goodies.
Yeah. Kilmer's still working. We just read that big profile.
That is true. That is true.
Kristen, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Central Park, which is going to be on Apple TV and it's just really delightful. I know that it was to some extent a product of your friendship with a couple of the people working on it. What was it that drew you to the project? Because I know that obviously you kind of have to shift gears when you're doing voice work versus when you're doing live action stuff. What was it about Central Park that attracted you?
Well, first of all, I love voice work more than anything because you and I say this joke a lot, but you can go in your pajamas. But also there's this added challenge, which I really enjoy because I have been a person who my whole life hears things musically. Somebody comes into the kitchen and says, good morning. Like that's all of a sudden a tune in my head. And being able to only use your voice as your instrument and make people feel things just by the sound of it has always been fun for me. But what drew me to the project was, I'm going to say nothing because there was no project. Josh Gad, who created it with Lauren Bouchard, who runs Bob's Burgers and just is one of the greatest guys in animation. They called me probably 6 or 8 months before anything was ever done. And Josh was like, do you want to do a cartoon with me? And I was like, sure. And he was like, okay. And I said, okay, bye. And then that was it. And one of the things I love so much about Josh, I mean, obviously I've worked with him for 10 years on Frozen. He's a wonderful light bulb of a person. So I want to work alongside him. I also trust him creatively a lot, that he will choose the funniest stuff, that he's got everyone's best interests in mind. He's an easy person to work with. And he kind of did what my dream is, which is he just called all of the people that he either loves and admires or are his friends and said, should we do a TV show together? And that's the idea behind Central Park. So he called me, David Diggs, Leslie Odom Jr., Stanley Tucci, Catherine Hahn, Titus Burgess, and he just said, "Do you guys want to figure out a cartoon we could do together?" And then after everybody had said yes, they said, "Okay, what could this be about?" The greatest shows are about family, even if it's in an office place. That's the family, right? It's about the family dynamic. So it turned out to be this family who was living in Central Park because the dad is sort of runs the park, and the nemesis is a woman named Betsy, who Stanley is played by the brilliant Stanley Tucci, who's trying to basically build a shopping mall in the middle of the park. And it's just about this family. And I get to play this wonderful girl named Molly, who is a teenager, but not in the cliche form. She has a lot of social anxiety, but she has all these worlds going on in her head, and she draws comic books. And so often the cartoon will switch from real life to her comic book version. And it's just really beautiful.
I'm so glad that it turned into the story that it did, because halfway through the origin tale, it does sound like Josh was just trying to get tickets to Hamilton. And
100%. 100%.
But once he did, he then continued to do the work, which I really admire.
Right.
Would you describe yourself as like a Central Park head? Like are you pretty into the park?
Yeah, like the real park?
Yeah, the real park. Yeah.
Is that a thing, Chris?
Well, because when I lived in New York, I would go to the Central Park infrequently, I would say. And it would always be like, did you guys know about this park? Like in the middle of the city? It is amazing. And then I would go back to Brooklyn, and I wouldn't go back uptown for like 4 years. But it is an absolutely magical place to be.
It really is. And you can't really discover every corner of it no matter how hard you try, which is something we sort of go into in the show. I mean, it's a comedy, obviously, but there's so many. There's there's a zoo in Central Park. There's lakes in Central Park. I went to NYU, New York University, and I did spend a lot of time in Sheep's Meadow, as did all the other college students, doing a variety of activities.
Sure. Yeah.
Frisbee to low-level drug experiments,
More Frisbee afterwards.
Yeah,
more
exactly.
Frisbee afterwards.
Frisbee just gets more exciting after that.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to find out, like you mentioned how the voice work is something that you were really drawn to. Is there a similar process? Because obviously if the Josh thing is more about a collaboration with somebody where it's just like, hey, let's do something together. But do you have a different, basically like, meter for how you judge material when you're thinking about it as voice work versus when you're thinking about doing something that's live action? Like, or are you interrogating it in the same way in terms of story, in terms of character?
That's a good question. Wow. I think I do, have a different way of judging the material, because I have one tool. And it's my voice. So it's got to be very clear. It has to... I have to be able, basically, with the ingredients they've given me, which are the words, create a really good recipe. And so if I don't feel like the words are there, it's just going to fall flat. Like the tone of someone's voice isn't really what's special to me. It's like how they use it. So I have a sort of stricter way of judging voiceover projects, because I only you're literally doing it with one tool and one tool alone. Whereas if you read a script, you could say, oh, well, she says yes, but her eyes say no. Well, I can't do that in a cartoon. There's so much left to the animators. And thankfully I've worked with really, really good animators. But the other cool thing about Central Park that I didn't even know that I would love so much, or I didn't even know was happening, is Josh made it a musical. And there are different writers writing the musicals, all writing each song. So like I sing a song that's written by Sarah Bareilles. I sing a song that's written by Meghan Trainor. There's Cyndi Lauper wrote some music. Like it's really, really exceptional music, because it's coming from incredible current music writers.
It's also interesting because it seems like, at least from the early glimpses that we've gotten of the show Central Park, that it has a sort of serialized story underneath, pushing it forward in terms of the threat to the park. I was curious if that's something that appealed to you as well, because obviously both with the way TV is going in general and also your work on The Good Place that we want to talk about, I'm sure, momentarily, that show was nothing if not a relentless boulder rolling down the hill of plot, and which is one of the things that made it so exciting. It's one of the ways that TV has generally changed, right? Where a cartoon, The Simpsons, can run 30 years because it's just The Simpsons. But it seems like in this case of Central Park, there's both the family element that could go on for a long time, but also some larger plot that's going to take us through at least the first 2 seasons.
Yeah, I think the best shows are built like that. And again, I'm not a show creator, so it's I can recognize it when it's done and when it's not done, but I don't know that I have the ability to create something like that. But Josh and Lauren do. So yeah, Central Park does have this. They have the family issues, which you could do literally thousands of episodes, because you have like a young adolescent boy that Titus plays, who's in love with a dog and struggling with that, and is like constantly trying to get closer to this dog, not sexually, but he just really loves this dog. And then you have the older character, Molly, who's a teenager who can't really talk to boys, but is in love with this boy she calls Kite Boy, who's played by Eugene Cordero, the unbelievable improv comedian, and who was also on The Good Place. But there's all this stuff in the family dynamic. Also, their mom, played by Katherine Hahn, is like a journalist, and she really wants to do like not puff pieces anymore. So everybody has a desire, like a want, which is what you want to watch. You want to watch your characters try to accomplish something. But then there's this bigger, broader sort of problem about real estate development that wants to take over the park. And so there's this serialized element, and sort of not procedural, but you can go along with the family. But then there's also this overarching doom that if the rich people gain control, the park is gone and the family wants to fight for the park. So it's like, yeah, you're rooting for 2 stories. And again, let me be clear that this is a cartoon and it's fun and it's musical and it's not this complex. But I'm just speaking to the amount of work that goes into creating a show that's really, really fun and watchable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the hallmarks of your work is that the shows, whether they delve into darkness or not, are ultimately like really, really watchable, really, really fun. I was curious about what it's like to be associated with a couple of roles like Eleanor, like Veronica Mars, and like Anna, even, where those parts almost like
Chris, it's Anna. There's one
Anna.
of us.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I was so embarrassed for a second. I'm glad
know.
you said it.
Should we just get into this now?
No, you can ask your question. I have so many Frozen questions that I am just sitting on. That's why I'm twitching here, just letting Chris do the boilerplate stuff. So please, let's let Chris ask his serious, grown-up question, and then we're going to get into it.
My question was more just like, what's it like when some parts that you play almost slip into becoming like folk songs, where they're so big or so kind of indelible with people that do you ever feel like you kind of like are on the outside looking in of those parts anymore? Like for me, it's like I know people who have grown up with Veronica Mars, and Eleanor was such like a huge part, not only of like television, but like almost every time you would open up social media or Twitter, you would see an Eleanor, like a meme of something from Good Place for a couple of years there. And with Anna, like obviously that's become a part of so many people's childhoods and parenthoods. Does it ever feel like those parts slip away from you at all?
I still feel intensely connected to all of them, but where I identify with what you're saying is that I don't ever feel ownership over them. Yeah. I don't ever feel like they're important to me, like they're important to the fans. I don't really ever feel, any sense of ownership over any of them. I feel like Veronica Mars was a part of me, but I also think that the fans of Veronica Mars feel like she was a part of them. And I want to be friends with those characters just like everyone else does. I just had the really, really lucky experience and opportunity to play those characters. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that each one is probably different. I was really fascinated. I thought that the last season of Veronica Mars that you guys did was incredible, like just absolutely incredible.
Thanks.
And I know it was so interesting to see, Veronica Mars was something that was sustained for a while by its fandom, but then you guys made these really, really bold creative choices with the most recent season. And I imagine that there was some tension with that in terms of like, this is something that a lot of people feel almost a collective ownership of, but and we're almost like jumping off the cliff with that in a weird way.
Yeah, it rocked the boat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
rocked the boat. Just Google it. So yeah, there was I didn't make any of these decisions, but I was privy to all of them. And watching Rob Thomas's brilliant mind work is always interesting and fun. But the show, I think, was appreciated by people because she was the girl you wanted to defend you in high school. She was the girl who said exactly what you think of 20 minutes later to say to the snarky popular girl or the bad guy or whatever. She was fighting for the underdog, but she was still complex and vulnerable. And then when we kickstarted, all of a sudden it got all this notoriety because it was the little show that could, and it was under the radar. But then the industry was like, wait a minute, people put $5 million to make this movie. What project was this? So because of that, Rob was very intentional about the movie because he said, look, the fans funded this movie. We are going to give the fans what they want. They paid for it. This is the fans' movie. So what he actually did was he said, what's the scene that everyone wants to see? What would just make them jump out of their seats? It's Veronica Mars punching Madison Sinclair, the most popular girl in the high school, the cruelest, in the face. And he said, okay, I'll write the movie backwards. So he got us to that point, and then he wrote whatever needed to happen up to that point. And that was the gift to the fans. When Hulu greenlit the season 4 and Veronica was older, Rob felt like he wanted to and needed to create a new perimeter for Veronica to really push the boundaries and push the show, not just because it needed to be reinvigorated, and because if you just did the same thing, somebody would find a critique with that, but also because television has come so far since then.
Yeah.
He wanted to be way more complex about it. He wanted to people kill off characters a lot now. Game of Thrones was like, kill your darlings.
Yeah.
So he wanted to sort of experiment with that. And he also is allowed to be a writer that spreads his wings. And I don't know that made all of the hardcore fans the happiest, but I do think it allowed us to accomplish a really creative season of television that we were proud of, not resting in our laurels on all the old tropes that just worked for Veronica Mars and were sort of lazy about it. He really wanted to try to reinvent it a little bit and give her some older storylines.
Yeah.
Give her some older problems.
That's a character that always was wise beyond her years anyway. So to actually have her, to get to see her aging into that wisdom and then learning new things was really cool. And I also just thought it was a really just awesome detective story and noir. Like beach noir is like one of my favorite things to read in any way. So
thanks. Yeah, it's fun to watch. It was also really fun to shoot. There's something really, really special about that project because it keeps coming back, and I get asked about it all the time. And I'm always like, look, I'll play it until it's Murder, She Wrote. I will play it until everyone in Neptune is dead. And then you figure out it's been Veronica who's been killing them. I mean, I don't care. I like the character gave me a fair amount of strength in my own life. Like I played her in my early 20s and I needed her. She was my therapy because I was a struggling codependent and I still am. But Veronica's desperation to see the underdog succeed and her just ability to be blunt and direct with people, like it helped me. And then the added bonus of seeing these people I grew up with, Percy and Francis and Jason and Ryan and Rico, my boys, to be able to work with them when I was 24 and then also when I was 37 and then also when I was 34. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So now that we've talked about aging gracefully, I want to de-age the conversation.
Okay.
My older daughter was born in 2013, and that was the same year that Frozen, or as it's known in my house, Frozen 1, was released. I have many questions. I've tried to edit them down to a reasonable amount. The first one was really this. I recently watched the trailer for Frozen 1. And because it wasn't on my radar, because I wasn't a parent yet, I didn't remember how the movie was marketed. I just remembered learning about it as this juggernaut that all the kids who were slightly older than my kids knew about. And then I entered and grew to love. The trailer doesn't really market the movie that it is and the phenomenon that it became. It really is just like, here's a romp. Here's an adventure story. trying to fight this evil queen. It doesn't really foreground the sister relationship, all the things that I think made the movie special. So what I was wondering is, when you came onto the project, which must have been a few years before the release, obviously, what was it that attracted you, and what was the moment when you and your fellow cast members realized that this might be something special?
Well, I was the first person cast, and I was cast because I was passed over for Tangled. I had auditioned for Tangled, and the casting director, after I sang, politely took me out of the room and was like, I don't think this is going to work out, but I really want you to sit down with a director who's doing something in a couple years here. His name is Chris Buck. Mm-hmm. And Chris Buck had directed Pocahontas, and he's like an incredibly established animator and a beautiful director. And we sat in the commissary on the Disney lot, and he said, I'm doing this Hans Christian Andersen tale called Anna and the Snow Queen, which will happen after Tangled. And I said, oh, tell me about it. And we talked, and I adored him. And over the next couple years, it was sort of developed, and Chris called me and was like, hey, I think we're going to try to do this. We're going to have a reading. And then they, initially it was like, the Snow Queen was evil. I think at one point It was going to be Bette Midler, and they were not sisters. And Chris, throughout the development, was like, I think it needs to be something a little bit different. And we had a different writer at that point. And Adina was cast. And I remember, because it was like a highlight of my life, and also one of the most embarrassing times, because we did a reading at Disney for everyone, all the executives. And they said, you and Adina need to prepare a song. And we were like, cool, give us a song. And they were like, nothing's been written. We were like, wait, we're just supposed to just prepare a song and sing it in the boardroom at the table read? What are you talking about? So I'd gone to Adina's house. We prepared Wind Beneath My Wings because we thought that was appropriate for a sister story.
And because Bette Midler Adina had taken Bette's part. So it was a sign of respect.
So we sang it, we got the part. But again, the script was not the script that came out. Anna's character, I was just excited to be in a Disney movie. That was it. I had wanted to be in Disney animation since I've been 5 years old. That was it. My character, though, was kind of annoying, kind of prissy, and just wasn't something I could identify with. But I didn't feel at the time I had the confidence to sort of say those notes. And as in the first few months of working on the script and putting down some scenes, because you record a bunch of scenes and then they go back and they sort of semi-animate them, then you record more, and it's this sort of step-by-step project where you're rewinding and coming back to it. I finally got the gumption to say to Chris, like, I feel like Anna needs to be different. I think she's not likable. And I also don't think I can infuse her with what I think my special energy is to add to this project. So about a year into working on it, Chris Buck and Peter decided to get a different writer. Peter Del Vecchio, who's our producer. And they said, listen, we're scrapping the script. And I was like, we've been working on this for a year. What are you talking about? They said, we're bringing in this woman named Jen Lee. She's incredible. She helped write Wreck-It Ralph, and we think you'll love her. Jen sat down with all of us to talk about our characters because she's really, really like research oriented. She wrote something that we weren't prepared for because the depth of it was a very adult story with real complex storylines. It wasn't about defeating a monster. It was about the complexities of feeling like you're too much for this world, or like one of your special characteristics is not something people like or want, and they will refuse it and it could hurt them. And so when Jen Lee came on, the whole project changed. Mm-hmm. And then I don't even remember the question because I've been talking for so long.
This is making my day. No, it's basically, you're talking me through all the behind the scenes stuff that I wondered about, because even up to the point of marketing, it seemed like no one was quite sure what this was because it didn't fit the mold. And the trailer, the first trailer, is like, it's a Disney adventure. And then you see the movie and it's much darker and spikier and more emotional, which is why
that works, right? Selling a Disney movie works. It works for kids, and all you need is for the kid, from a marketing perspective, all you need is for a kid to say, Mom, I want to go see that, or Dad, I want to go see that. But I think the beauty came in the depth of Jen's writing. And then Jen and Chris worked so well together they had them become co-directors because this story sort of lived in Jen's head, but Chris had all the know-how, and it just became this really beautiful collaboration between Jen and Chris, and basically saying to us, we're going to do something we've never done before. We're not going to have a villain. I mean, you're going to have a villain in Hans, but he's going to be a really small part. This is going to be about real life. And I have such a connection with Jen. There were quite a few scenes in the movie where we just improv'd, where I just said to Jen, like, I think I know what she's supposed to be saying right here. And Jen would go, okay, go. And then I'd stop and say, how was that? She'd go, what if you, and I'd go, yes. And then just start talking. And that whole, like, the identifiable Anna run to me, like when we found her, was an improv, which is right when Hans pushes her into the boat. And what is the exact line? She says, you're not awkward. I'm awkward. You're gorgeous. Wait, what? And I was like, oh, that's it. That's it. And Jen, I remember, got really excited, and we were like, yes, that's her. And I don't know any other way to articulate it other than that sentence is the character. So let's expand on that. She talks too fast. She talks too much. Wait, what is something I say a lot because I talk too fast and too much. And I just felt like we had found her, and then it became this beautiful journey of everything was making sense because they were following the real complex emotion of it. They weren't trying to make a kid's story with a hero character and a villain character, and then they fight and the hero wins. That was like thrown out the window.
Well, I should also say that then it's thanks to you that my younger daughter, who's now 3, has been saying, wait, what? Since she was 1 year old. A whole new generation. And thank both of you for indulging this. I just have one quick, but
I honestly haven't seen him this happy in 9 weeks. Yeah.
Do you want to know a fun fact about Frozen 2?
Yeah.
Okay. So Frozen 2 took so long because Jen and Chris, again, they're incredibly authentic, and it seemed like we were going to make a Frozen 2 because you make another movie when the first movie is successful. That's how the business works. But there had never been a Disney sequel. There's been Pixar sequels, but it was like a big thing for Disney. And they said, Walt would roll over in his grave because he said no sequels, but it's a shareholder company. So they decided to make a sequel. But Jen took her sweet, sweet time writing it. And she didn't want to just make episode 2, like Elsa loses her shoes. What do we do? We found it at the end. She wanted to make it as profound as the first one. And for months, she journaled as the characters. She journaled as Elsa. She journaled as Anna. Chris and Jen went to a therapist and psychologist together and said, here are the character types we have. What's going on? What are the struggles? What are the next steps in this type of person's life? What does this person struggle with? To figure out deeper motivations for Elsa and Anna. And then ultimately they decided that the way to end the movie was for Anna, spoiler alert, Anna to be queen because she loves her people. Anna to be queen and Elsa to be free. And then they wrote the movie backwards.
That's incredible. That kind of speaks to the question that I didn't even get to ask, which I can just turn into a compliment, which is to say that I think Frozen 2 is brilliant. And I'm so glad to hear what you're saying about it, because that's what I see in the movie. I love it because my daughters love it, of course, but I also love it because I just think it's one of the most impressive feats of story construction that I can remember. It's so thoughtful. It's so respectful of its characters. And so when I see some sort of like half-baked internet criticism being like, there's no villain, I'm like, that's what's genius about it. That's actually truer to an emotional journey.
Are there people with Frozen hot takes out there? Like there's no villain?
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you something about the Frozen splaining dad contingent on Twitter, who I have to fight as if this movie was not a gift.
Look, everybody wants to say something. Everyone wants to be involved, and some people don't get it. Some people don't get that that's actually the brilliant complexity of the movie, is that there is no villain, or the villain is you.
Yeah.
I mean, what could be more real life? You're the only one standing in your way.
It goes to some incredibly dark places. I mean, I was joking with Chris before the movie came out when I just saw I guess the songs had come out, and the Next Right Thing lyrics, and I was like, this is metal. This is, I don't know. This movie might be too dark for me, let alone my children. And yet, it is that type of darkness that I think makes the light work. I mean, it's actually quite respectful of emotions in a way that children of all ages can understand and not run from.
You want to know some secrets about that song?
I mean, yeah.
How dark are you willing to get, though?
I mean, Chris might have to mute himself, but I'm ready.
This is fascinating.
So the kernel of the idea of Anna having that developmental song first came in its very early stages from Jen and I sitting down, and she was basically like, what do you think Anna would be dealing with? What do you want Anna to accomplish? What do you want her to deal with? Which is not something a writer normally does with her cast. But this movie, again, is so collaborative. And I said, I really want her to deal with her codependency. I think we're very similar, Anna and I wanted her to deal with her codependency. I want her to do something alone. She's never done anything alone. It's always been for Hans or for Olaf or for Elsa or for the people. Like, what does she do when she's alone? What kind of decisions does she make? So we had sort of figured out, okay, then we'll leave her alone at some point. We'll separate them, Elsa and Anna. And then they were like, well, how far do we push it? Anna's trial, basically, her trauma. And then during the first Frozen movie, two people on our team, two really, really important people, one whom was our director, Chris Buck, and another who was one of our head animators, lost children. And it was genuinely rocking for the whole team because A, people bring their kids to work, so we knew all these kids. And B, there's no stopping the Disney train. So everybody came to work, Wow. Chris had to come. Chris's son, Ryder, was killed the week we started press for season 1, for movie 1, Frozen 1. And it was like sent a ripple effect through everybody. And so I think collectively the decision among Jen and Chris and everyone was, let's write about what you do when you don't know what to do. When there's literally nothing to do, no roadmap. So do the next right thing was the team's take on how our coworkers got through something unimaginable and soldiered on and still came to work and still lived their lives with what must be an immense amount of pain. And it was sort of a tribute to that. You just do the next right thing. There's no other way to say it.
That's incredible. And it speaks to something that people have watched this movie and loved these songs and not known the story, but the emotion in it is extremely powerful, and so much more than I think people give, or maybe even willing to admit from seeing a movie that, it's the big Disney Thanksgiving release, but it's a lot more than that to a lot of people.
Kristen Bell, thank you for being the MVP. You're the best.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Have a good one.